You're listening to Sip and Grow the podcast, the show where we taste awesome, delicious wines while having unfiltered conversations about our passions, experiences, struggles, entrepreneurship, and life. My name is Nicole Di Pasquale, and I'm a wine enthusiast just trying to pursue her passions and dreams while taking you on the journey with me, one episode at a time. My ultimate goal is to not only bring you wine knowledge and value, but also inspire you to enjoy your process and journey in pursuing your passions and dreams. Because guess what? The person you become while enduring the process is more important. So sit back, grab a glass, and let's sip and grow together. Hello, beautiful people. Welcome back to another episode on Sip and Grow with me, your host, Nicole Di Pasquale. I am so excited for today. Today, we're kind of getting into the science behind wine, which, granted, let me tell you, I am not a scientist. I am not an expert. I am just here. I'm a normal human being working on a vineyard, working a wine harvest, learning these things day by day, and basically filling you guys in on what I learned and my experiences here. And so far, I am currently on a vineyard that produces Pinot Noir grapes, and we are a little bit late in harvest. So it's the last week of August right now as I'm filming this, and usually they tend to, like the last couple of years, they started harvest around like the second week of August, but this year it's actually looking like we're going to start the first or second week of September, which, I mean, it's cool because I've gotten to learn a couple of other things and like got into deep conversations with like the winemaker in regards to like how the entire process works for harvest and what we will be doing. And we just had a lot of downtime to kind of like discuss things in detail before the madness starts when we start the wine harvest. So, and there's a lot of moving parts to it, but one of the things that I love when I talk to our winemaker about like different processes and stuff like that, he is so knowledgeable in the chemistry of wine as well, in that aspect. And it's something really difficult for me to understand because I never was really super into science until now, when I'm starting to learn that there's a lot of science components involving or involved in the winemaking process. So it's really cool to hear, but at the same time, while I'm listening to him, I'm like, I'm not gonna remember half of what he's saying because this is like a bunch of different compounds that I need to remember, and like names and stuff that goes like A plus B equals C, and I'm like, but it's really cool. And one of the things that he was explaining to us, so this past week we did our first sampling session on the grapes that we're gonna harvest for our sparkling wine. And basically what you do is you go out into the fields, and everyone has, like, every vineyard has different processes for this, but here what they have like a sheet that they created with their process of how to like go through each row of the vines and what sections of the clones. Remember, they have different sections of clones within a vineyard. So like what clone section we need to be in, and how many rows we got to go down before sampling, a certain row. So like depending on the clone and depending on where we're at, like located on the vineyard, they have certain practices of like going down, I don't know, 5 rows of vines, and then on the 5th row you start on the 10th vine, and then you collect from there, and you just collect like 3 or 4 clusters depending on how much he wants. This past week we did 3 clusters per vine, and then we would count. We would skip a bunch of them and then get from another one and then skip a bunch, and each clone has different procedures. So he can very well be like, okay, on this one I want you to go every 3 rows. I want you to pick out every 10th vine, I need you to pick out 3 clusters of grapes. and then you count what, like every 10 vines, cut those grapes, put it in a bucket, go 10 more, cut those grapes, put it in a bucket, and then at the end, if we, like, let's say there's 4 of us out there and we all sampled from the same clone, we'll just end up putting that all in one bucket and we'll get inside. And this is just for sampling purposes. So for the science behind the wine, to make sure, to see where the levels are at scientifically within the juice of the grapes. Excuse me. But it doesn't necessarily mean like we're using that wine, because this is not how you usually like when we pick the grapes and we go to get the juice out of the grapes, we literally put on boots, step on them, and get all the juice out of the grapes. And then we pour it into, like, we filter it and pour it into a little jar. And then we give it to our enologist and she analyzes it with all the little gadgets that we have in-house. But it's super cool. It's a super cool process. We're going to be doing a little bit more of that because we have to do it for each of the grapes that we will be using. But I felt like I needed to clarify that because one of my friends, so I posted it on Instagram, and one of my friends, like on my Instagram story for Sip and Grow podcast Instagram, I posted the entire process of us sampling that day. And she was like, I hope those boots are clean. And then I literally messaged her like, girl, we're not using this for drinking purposes. This is for legit, like, scientific purposes of analyzing the grapes before, like, we harvest them. So I thought it would be cool to kind of get into that aspect of winemaking today. Again, I think I'll learn a little bit more when we do it more often, because this is just based off the conversation I had with the winemaker and the sampling that we did this week. So I haven't really dug deep into it, but he kind of explained the concept behind it, which is really fascinating and cool, but it's a lot to remember. So I went ahead and wrote it down because I don't want to get anything incorrect here, but I'm going to try to break it down Nicole style, because there's a lot of words here and a lot of fancy terminology that I'm like, I just basically kind of wrote it down simplified, the easiest way for me to understand and what I understood from that conversation. Again, I could come back 2 or 3 weeks later from now and be like, oh, I understood this, but this is actually what this means and whatever. So to get into it, there's basically like, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah. There's like 6 different things that they measure for when we like harvest the grapes. So the first one is called the Brix measurement, Brix, right? So, and one thing to take into consideration is like, there's this thing that they call yield. So yield is a measure of the amount of grapes or wine that is produced per unit area of a vineyard. So the yields of the grapes are important as well, because you want to be at a certain yield when like harvesting the grapes. And if you have like let's say you have a lower yield, that means that you'll probably have a more concentrated flavor within the grapes. So like a lower yield, think of a yield basically like, so you have your vine, and then you have like the stems coming out of the vine, which are, they call canes, right? So like, let's say you have 2 canes coming out of one vine. The yield of that particular vine is basically the weight of all the grapes put together. And that's like, there's like a specific formula, which that's something else that I have to kind of like look up and research a little bit, just because it's a new term for me that I'm recently hearing, but I'm trying to familiarize myself with it because they do use it a lot out here when we go on the vineyards and stuff like that. So, but it's basically like they can measure it by the like weight of the grapes, and there's different types of grapes that'll thrive at different types of yields, if that makes sense. So going back to the measurements that they do for during the fermentation process of wines, what they look for is, the first thing that they measure for is the Brix measurement, which the Brix measurement is the measurement of the sugar content of grapes, must, and wine, indicating the degree of the grape's ripeness, which is basically like the sugar level of the grapes at harvest. So like you're basically measuring how much sugar content is within the grapes when you harvest the grapes. That's the first, like one of the first measurements you do. And he showed us the machine. It's like a little machine that our enologist uses. And it's just like, it's about this big. It's not that big. And you just basically stick it in the juice and measure, and it'll measure that measurement for you. So that's the first measurement, Brix, Brix. So think of it like it's a scale to measure like the density of liquids, basically. Next, we measure the pH of the wine. So the pH matters because it basically measures like the acidity in wine. And a low pH will stop bacteria from growing, which allows sugar fermentation to have a more balanced progression and improve control of malolactic fermentation. So malolactic fermentation, there's two types of fermentations that happen during the winemaking process. So like in the quote unquote fermentation process, while they're taking all these measurements, which I guess for now I'm gonna list out all the measurements that they do, and then we can go into like the whole fermentation process, because it all comes together, but there's like a lot of terminology, and that's why I wrote it down, because I was like, I'm not gonna remember all this. At least like in my first go, just because I recently learned about all this, like the details behind all this. So they have the Brix measurement, the pH measurement. They have what's called TA measurement, which is the total acidity. There's another word for it that I cannot pronounce for the life of me, but my winemaker was like, it's basically like the total acidity within the wine. I'm gonna try it, and I'm sorry if I butcher this name, but this is how I'm gonna spell it first. It's spelled Titratable. Titratable. Titra, titra, titratable. I can't say that word. For the life of me, I can't. So we're just gonna call it total acidity, because that's what it basically means. So the TA is measured. Then the YAN, YAN, is another measurement that they do, which is basically, it stands for yeast assimilable nitrogen. We're gonna put a pin on that. We're gonna come back to that because that's important. And then they also measure the MA, which is the malic acid. So those are basically everything that is taken into consideration and measured. Not taken into consideration, they measure it. They measure all those levels have importance during this entire process, because the fermentation of the juice, of the grape juice, is like the most crucial process ever, because this is what's gonna make or break your wine. It's gonna either become a great wine, or something happened during the process and you don't have a good tasting wine. It's that serious. So let's go back to the pH. So usually winemakers, they like to have a pH between like 3.0 to 3.5. That's like the preferred range universally, but everyone has their own methods and practices for that. But one thing I did find interesting was that it said, so like within the wine, there's different types of acids. So there's two acids called malic acid and tartaric acid. So like changes in the malic and tartaric ratio can impact the pH. So with that said, tartaric acid is a stronger acid than malic acid. This means you can have grapes or wine that have the same total acidity. Remember the TA measurement we were talking about? So they can have the same amount of total acidity within the wine or the grapes, but they can have different pH values due to the differences in malic and tartaric acid content. I don't know if you guys heard the back noise of intense cars, but there was like intense cars passing. I apologize for that and their behavior on a Sunday. It's a Sunday, it's the Lord's Day. Why are you acting like an animal on the streets of Sonoma County? Anyways, going back to this, I thought this was interesting because there's so many little different factors that can affect like different levels. So in this case, the pH level can be different, but which will essentially change, like it's important because it can change the how the wine tastes, you know. And then the malic acid affects how much of a pH shift occurs post malolactic fermentation. So remember how I said there's two types of fermentation within the fermentation process? What that means is like the first fermentation is essentially there's like these yeasts within, like natural occurring yeast within the juice of the wine, right? So you crushed the grapes, you smashed the grapes, you already turned it into like this juice, and you're just waiting for the fermentation. It's called like alcoholic fermentation to start. So how does alcoholic fermentation start? Basically, it starts when the yeasts they turn the sugars in the wine into ethanol. So that's the alcoholic fermentation in a nutshell, is when the yeast turns sugars to ethanol, which is alcohol. And then during that entire process, there's another fermentation happening called malolactic fermentation. So what is malolactic fermentation? Why is it important? It basically determines the aromas and flavors of your wine. So I have it here. Malolactic fermentation is the conversion of malic acid to lactic acid, leading to a reduction in acidity and the production of aroma and flavor compounds. So it's really crucial. Like both processes are really crucial. And here is where, remember that the yeast assimilable nitrogen, the YAN measurement we were talking about, this is where that comes in. So this is important because you basically need to feed your you need to make sure your yeast are well fed and strong enough to last during this fermentation process. Because once fermentation starts, you just gotta let it do your thing, do its thing. And like, you can't really do much after that. You just have to pray that you have healthy yeast in there that are gonna be able to, you know, survive the entire process until it fully finishes both fermentations. So this is what our winemaker was explaining to us. He's like, there's these nutrients that they put in. So they're monitoring all these measurements that I just mentioned, because right before fermentation happens, you need to feed the yeast to make sure that they have all the nutrients necessary. And this is like, the measurements also help you analyze what's in there and what's not in there, so that you know how much nutrients you need to give your yeast in order for them to be healthy and strong during the entire process. So like, once you have all these measurements and like there's a chart and everything with all these processes happening, and like once you see that fermentation's about to hit, like timing is everything in this too. So he was just like emphasizing the fact about how timing is so important, and you basically like feed it right before fermentation happens to make sure that they're strong and healthy and have all the nutrients they need to survive the entire process. And then once the alcoholic fermentation and malolactic fermentation are done and set, you have yourself your beautiful wine, your magical juice created. So these are really important processes that they take very seriously. And like I said, like everyone has their own way of doing it, but there's more or less a range of numbers for each of these measurements that they need to be within that range. So every winemaker has their specific process or procedures that they do to ensure that everything runs smoothly and goes accordingly. But I just thought it was really cool and fascinating. And then the winemaker started talking about how nitrogen feeds on like amino acids, and I don't know, like all these scientific compounds stuff. And I was fascinated, but at the same time, I was like, I'm not gonna remember this. This is something that I did not really study, and I really want to know how to explain this to people one day. So we're working on it. We're working on our scientific facts, but it's okay. Anyways, let's go ahead and get into this wine. So this is the last bottle of Domaine Bousquet. It's Domaine Bousquet is the name of the vineyard. It's in Mendoza, Argentina. And this is, I had bought 3 bottles, all different from this producer or this vineyard, to try them. And this is the last one that I have here. So this is a Malbec 2021. It's made with organic grapes. So the cool thing about this vineyard is that it is organic, natural wines, vegan friendly, gluten free friendly. It actually says it on the back of the bottle here. So it says gluten free, vegan, organic, and it has like a lot of other information. And it's from Tupungato, Uco Valley, Mendoza, Argentina. And I really like this, how they like put a bunch of information in the back of the wine. So like if you go to the back, it'll say where the grapes are from. It says in the foothills of the Andes at 4,000 feet. And then it gives you like the temperature differences that the grapes experience, how it's 100% organically grown grapes. And then it gives you like a little description of what they taste in the wines, which we're gonna see if it says it's mushroom, fig, berries, aromas, medium bodied and round velvety tannins. We're gonna see if that's true. Another thing I found interesting was that it did say, I read this. So I went online and kind of tried to find more information on this specific wine, and it said it's unoaked wine. So what does that mean? That means that it was not aged in oak. This was actually aged in stainless steel tanks. So this is unoaked wine, and also it's gluten free, which I learned recently. I went to visit a cooperage, which a cooperage is a place where barrels are made, and I got to see an entire like the entire process of how to make barrels, and the history behind barrel making, which I definitely want to do an episode on that with you guys, because that's a whole nother realm of information that was overwhelming but super cool. So one thing that I learned was that some barrels makers, most barrel makers, this is called, like the top of a barrel is called the head of the barrel, right? So there's 2 heads, and on each side, they basically, one of the last things that they do is that they put the top of the barrel, which is this round part here, in the, like they make sure they secure it in so that there's no leakage. So one thing I learned is like before they secure it in, they put like this paste or glue around the head, and it's usually made with like flour. It's like flour based, or there's other type of, they make it with other types of things, but the most common one I think is like flour based. So technically doing that, a wine wouldn't be gluten free because it's exposed to the paste that they use to connect the head to the barrel, right? So it's like, it's very minimal. It's not like they slather it all around. It's just they do it around the groove of where it needs to connect to kind of seal in so that there's no leakage. But that would be one of the reasons why a wine might not be gluten free. So if you guys ever have thought that, like, if all my gluten free people out there, if you ever were like tasted a wine and you're like, oh my God, this kind of like messed me up because it seems like it would have gluten, because I feel bad, like usually how I feel when I eat gluten, that might be the case. I would have to dive deep into that too, but that's a fun fact that I recently learned that I was like, oh, okay. So this kind of makes sense that this one's gluten free because it's unoaked, right? So it's not put in a barrel. It's not aged in a barrel, I'm sorry. It's aged in a stainless steel tank. So I found that very interesting. Let's go ahead and taste it. I know it's getting a little dark, and I apologize to all my viewers if I look dark right now. The sun has officially set. I'm the culprit. I am the culprit because I filmed a little later today. So this is a me problem. So let's go ahead and taste this wine. So already, you know, you know how I feel about natural wines. They're either great or they're okay. There's no in between. Oh, that's a bug. All right, so let's go ahead and pour this bad boy. So already I'm getting a deep red, ruby red color. So this is a 2021 vintage, so it's still fairly young. So it does look young based off the color. And let's go ahead and, yeah, I think it's like, it's a pretty decent temperature. I had it at 55 degrees Fahrenheit, so it's not that bad. And we've been sitting out here, even though it's kind of, I think it's probably like 60 degrees Fahrenheit outside right now, or maybe a little, like maybe like 58. So, you know, we're in the wine cooler right now. But let's see if the smell opens up a little bit. Interesting. So it's funny because it does, I smell the, like I smell like I'm in a forest passing by like mushrooms on the floor that have just been rained on a little bit. So like it's a little like muggy. It's a little muggy, and just like I smell like the earthiness to it. So it makes sense that they listed mushrooms as one of the things, because I do smell that here. I do smell more on the like earthy side of things versus like fruit side of things. So there's something in here. So definitely like that wet forest mugginess is up in here, and there's something else. Let's see. I can even sense like huckleberry. So like huckleberry is kind of like the cousin of a blueberry. But I definitely smell like a blueberry, huckleberry hint in here. I also do smell the fig that they were talking about in the wine. So let's go ahead and taste it. Let's taste this bad boy. Okay, not too bad. So I definitely taste it is medium bodied, but it's like, it goes down smoothly. So it's not a bad, it's actually not that bad. It's not, I personally, like, I love Malbec. I would rate this, out of like 1 out of 10, I would rate this a 6.5. No, a 7. I'm being too mean. I would rate it a 7. It's not bad. I just feel like it's not exciting to me. It's just, it's good. It's not bad, but it's not exciting. So it's like, I can easily drink this. It's not, I would definitely like, this is at a $15 price point. So I think this is good if you're having like a big group of people over and you know you're going to be drinking a lot. This is a good option. I think this is a good option for like casual drinking, but it's nothing, I wouldn't bring this out to like people who are super into wines, because I just feel like it's a little bit, it lacks character, and I don't want to sound harsh or mean, but like that's what I feel. But yeah, overall I would give it a 7 out of 10. Definitely if you want a good affordable Malbec to drink that's natural, organic, vegan, I think this is a good go-to. I prefer this one to another one called Vitahin. I prefer this one for sure. So Anyways, I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode. I'm so sorry that it is very dark right now. This won't happen again, I promise. I will make sure that I film earlier next time. But anyways, if you guys want to check out some goodies that I have for you, in the link in my bio, go ahead and check that out on my Stan store. Follow me on socials, the Sip and Grow podcast on Instagram. I'm also on TikTok through my personal account and Instagram through my personal account as well. I really hope you've enjoyed this episode, and I can't wait to see you at the next one. Cheers!